Hello. 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 Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with Part 6, Chapter 1. But first, I am 8 books behind on my reading goals of reading 100 books this year. It's a silly goal. I shouldn't have done it. Next year, I know I've said this a million times, and I will continue to say it every time I talk about my reading goals, but next year I am going to do a number of pages rather than number of books, because number of books just makes me not want to read the larger books. Anna Karenina. So it just feels like I'm behind. But this year I am definitely reading more pages than I did last year so far. And also, I'm definitely reading more words this year than last year. Last year, I also filled in with a bunch of manga. So to make myself feel a little bit better, I am reading some manga, and I started reading Chainsaw Man. So I've read the first one, and I just finished the second one today. I'm on hold for the third one. And my plan is to read through to where the first season of the anime ends, and then watch the anime, and then be like, which do I like better? And then go back. Because that's just who I am. So, let's do it. Let's see if I can accurately remember and summarize the spark notes that I've read hours ago. So today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and we're starting with Part 6, Chapter 1. Where did we leave our characters? That's a great question. In turmoil, of course, because it's Tolstoy. So we have Anna who has gallivanted off with Vronsky, and they are now back in Petersburg, and Anna desperately wants to see her son Siroisa. And so she writes a little note and sends it off, and she gets a response that says no. And she's real upset. And so she decides that she's going to see her son anyway for his birthday. So she gets him a gift. She goes incognito into the house to see her son. Her son is just overjoyed to see her. She leaves successfully without any bad things happening. And then her and Vronsky's relationship is very tumultuous and rocky in that it doesn't have the excitement and the joy of this forbidden fruit type aspect. So now that they're together, Anna's insecurities are ever much at play, and Vronsky's oh, I don't know if she's pretty enough anymore is also at play. And so they're going back and forth with their own internal struggles and trying to figure out what the other person needs as well. Going over to Anna's husband, and Vanya. I don't remember her name. It's not Vanya. Vanya is the name of that one character in the Umbrella Academy. It's not Vanya. But going over there, her husband is just so distraught, but is pushing along, and I forgot her name, but she comes along and is like, oh, let me help you put the pieces of your life back together, and I'll help you with your son. And so she is just known for very easily falling in love with people of power. And so she has now fallen in love with Anna's husband. And she is actually the one to get the letter, and she is the one who convinces Anna's husband to say no. Great. Love that. Excellent. Amazing. Also, they told Anna's son, Siroisa, that she died. okay, that's not what happened. But so Yorza doesn't believe it. He's like, no, that can't possibly be happening. Like, I would feel it if, like, my mom died. And so he's holding on to that hope, and that's why an additional layer of why he's so overjoyed to see her when she comes to visit. I think that might be it. At least in the last little bit of what we read, that was the main focus of everything. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And something that Tolstoy is also just really good with is putting in little reminders, especially at the beginnings of new parts. Now he's going to be like, hey, buddy, remember this character? Remember what they were doing? And then we'll be like, no, we don't. And then Tolstoy will tell us everything that we need to know. Thank you. So, let's do it. Let's do it. Part 6, Chapter 1. Let's do it. Darya Alexandrovna spent the summer with her children at Pokrovsko at her sister Kitty Levin's. The house on her own estate was quite in ruins, and Levin and his wife had persuaded her to spend the summer with them. Stepan Arkadyevitch greatly approved of the arrangement. He said he was very sorry his official duties prevented him from spending the summer in the country with his family, which would have been the greatest happiness for him. And remaining in Moscow, he came down to the country from time to time for a day or two. Besides the Oblonskys, with all their children and their governess, the old princess, too, came to stay that summer with the Levins, and she considered it her duty to watch over her inexperienced daughter in her interesting condition. Moreover, Varenka, Kitty's friend abroad, kept her promise to come to Kitty when she was married, and stayed with her friend. All of these were friends or relations of Levin's wife. And though he liked them all, he rather regretted his own Levin world and ways, which was smothered by this influx of Sherbatskoy element, as he called it to himself. Of his own relations, there stayed with him only Sergei Ivanovitch, but he too was a man of the Kuznevshiv, and not the Levin stamp, so that the Levin spirit was utterly obliterated. In the Levin's house, so long deserted, there were now so many people that almost all the rooms were occupied, and almost every day it happened that the old princess, sitting down to table, counted them all over, and put the 13th grandson or granddaughter at a separate table. And Kitty, with her careful housekeeping, had no little trouble to get all the chickens, turkeys, and geese, of which so many were needed to satisfy the summer appetites of the visitors and children. The whole family were sitting at dinner. Dolly's children, with their governess and Varenka, were making plans for going to look for mushrooms. Sergei Ivanovitch, who was looked up to by all the party for his intellect and learning, with a respect that almost amounted to awe, surprised everyone by joining in the conversation about mushrooms. "Take me with you. I am very fond of picking mushrooms," he said, looking at Varenka. "I think it's a very nice occupation." "Oh, we shall be delighted," answered Varenka, coloring a little. Kitty exchanged meaningful glances with Dolly. The proposal of the learned and intellectual Sergei Ivanovitch to go looking for mushrooms with Varenka confirmed certain theories of Kitty's with which her maid had been very busy of late. She made haste to address some remark to her mother so that her look should not be noticed. After dinner, Sergei Ivanovitch sat with his cup of coffee at the drawing-room window, and while he took part in a conversation he had begun with his brother, he watched the door through which the children would start on the mushroom-picking expedition. Levin was sitting in the window near with his brother. Kitty stood beside her husband, evidently awaiting the end of a conversation that had no interest for her, in order to tell him something. "You have changed in many respects since your marriage, and for the better," said Sergei Ivanovich, smiling to Kitty and obviously little interested in the conversation. "But you have remained true to your passion for defending the most paradoxical theories." "Katya, it's not good for you to stand," her husband said to her, putting a chair for her and looking significantly at her. "Oh, and there's no time either," added Sergei Ivanovich, seeing the children running out. At the head of them all, Tanya galloped sideways in her tightly drawn stockings and waving a basket that Sergei Ivanovich's hat. She also ran straight up to him. Boldly running up to Sergei Ivanovich with shining eyes, so like her father's fine eyes, she handed him his hat and made as though she would put it on for him, softening her freedom by a shy and friendly smile. "Varenka's waiting," she said, carefully putting his hat on, seeing from Sergei Ivanovich's smile that she must do so. Varenka was standing at the door, dressed in a yellow print gown, with a white kerchief on her head. I'm coming, Varvara Andreevna," said Sergei Ivanovich, finishing his cup of coffee, and putting into their separate pockets his handkerchief and cigar case. "And how sweet my Varenka is, hey?" said Kitty to her husband, as soon as Sergei Ivanovich rose. She spoke so that Sergei Ivanovich could hear, and it was clear that she meant him to do so. "And how good-looking she is. Such a refined beauty. Varenka!" Kitty shouted. "Shall you be in the mill copse? We'll come out to you." "You certainly forget your condition, Kitty," said the old princess, hurriedly coming out at the door. "You mustn't shout like that." Varenka, hearing Kitty's voice and her mother's reprimand, went with light, rapid steps up to Kitty. The rapidity of her movement, her flushed and eager face, everything betrayed that something out of the common was going on in her. Kitty knew what this was and had been watching her intently. She called Varenka at that moment merely in order mentally to give her a blessing for the important event which, as Kitty fancied, was bound to come to pass that day after dinner in the wood. "Varenka, I should be very happy if a certain something were to happen," she whispered as she kissed her. "And are you coming with us?" Varenka said to Levin in confusion, pretending not to have heard what had just been said. "I am coming, but only as far as the threshing floor, and there I shall stop." "Why? What do you want there?" said Kitty. "I must go to have a look at the new wagons, and to check the invoice," said Levin. "And where will you be?" "On the terrace." End of chapter 1. Short, sweet, reminding you that there are other characters besides Anna and Vronsky. So we are back with Levin and Kitty. Let's remind ourselves, they are married, and it is not the marriage that either one of them had pictured in their brain of what married life would be. And we all know that Levin is very opinionated. And so now we have Levin and Kitty's little family, and also how it is growing, and that they are still, out in the countryside. It is summertime, and Levin is still Levin. He very much is mostly interested in his ideals and not them being changed at all. And he's like, I need to go look at these wagons for my land. Let us not forget that Levin has become an expert and definitely wants to change how things are governed with his own property and workers and things like that. Levin, please. Chapter 2. On the terrace were assembled all the ladies of the party. They always liked sitting there for dinner, and that day they had work to do there, too. Besides the sewing and knitting of baby clothes, which all of them were busy. That afternoon, jam was being made on the terrace by a method new to Agafea Mikhailovna, without the addition of water. Kitty had introduced this new method, which had been in use in her home. Agafea Mikhailovna, to whom the task of jam-making had always been entrusted, considered that what had been done in the Levin household could not be amiss, had nevertheless put water with the strawberries, maintaining that the jam could not be made without it. She had been caught in the act, and was now making jam before everyone, and it was to be proved to her conclusively that jam could be very well made without water. Agafea Mikhailovna, her face heated and angry, her hair untidy, and her thin arms bare to the elbows, was turning the preserving pan over the charcoal stove, looking darkly at the raspberries and devoutly hoping they would stick and not cook properly. The princess, conscious that Agafea Mikhailovna's wrath must be chiefly directed against her, as the person responsible for the raspberry jam making, tried to appear to be absorbed in other things and not interested in the jam, talked of other matters, but cast stealthy glances in the direction of the stove. I always buy my maid's dresses myself, of some cheap material, the princess said, continuing the previous conversation. Isn't it time to skim it, my dear? She added, addressing Agafea Mikhailovna. There's not the slightest need for you to do it, and it's hot for you, she said, stopping Kitty. Oh, I'll do it, said Dolly, getting up. She carefully passed the spoon over the frothing sugar, and from time to time shook off the clinging jam from the spoon by knocking it on a plate that was covered with yellow-red scum and blood-colored syrup. How they'll enjoy this at tea time, she thought of her children, remembering how she herself as a child had wondered how it was the grown-up people did not eat what was best of all, the scum of jam. Stiva says it's much better to give money. Dolly took up, meanwhile, the weighty subject under discussion, what presents should be made to servants. But money's out of the question, the princess and Kitty exclaimed with one voice. They appreciate a present. Well, last year, for instance, I bought our Matrona Semyonovna, not a poplin, but something of that sort. I remember she was wearing it on your name day. A charming pattern, so simple and refined. I should have liked it myself if she hadn't had it. Something like Varenka's, so pretty and inexpensive. Well, now I think it's done, said Dolly, dropping the syrup from the spoon. When it sets as it drops, it's ready. Cook it a little longer, Agafea Mikhailovna. The flies, said Agafea Mikhailovna angrily. It'll be just the same, she added. Oh, how sweet it is. Don't frighten it, Kitty said suddenly, looking at the sparrow that had settled on a step and was pecking at the corner of a raspberry. Yes, but you keep a little further from the stove, said her mother. Apropos de Varenka, said Kitty, speaking in French, as they had been doing all the while, so that Agafea Mikhailovna should not understand them. You know, Mamma, I somehow expect things to be settled today. You know what I mean. How splendid it would be. But what a famous matchmaker she is, said Dolly. How carefully and cleverly she throws them together. No, tell me, Mamma, what do you think? Why, what is one to think? He meant Sergei Ivanovich, might at any time have been a match for anyone in Russia. Now, of course, he's not quite a young man. Still, I know ever so many girls would be glad to marry him, even now. She's a very nice girl, but he might. Oh, no, Mamma, do understand why. For him and for her, too. Nothing better could be imagined. In the first place, She's charming, said Kitty, crooking one of her fingers. He thinks her very attractive, that's certain, assented Dolly. Then he occupies such a position in society that he has no need to look for either fortune or position in his wife. All he needs is a good, sweet wife, a restful one. Well, with her he would certainly be restful, Dolly assured. Thirdly, that she should love him, and so it is. That is, it would be so splendid. I look forward to seeing them coming out of the forest, and everything settled. I shall see at once by their eyes. I should be so delighted. What do you think, Dolly? But don't excite yourself. It's not at all the things for you to be excited, said her mother. Oh, I'm not excited, Mamma. I fancy he will make her an offer today. Oh, that's so strange. How and when a man makes an offer. There's a sort of barrier, and all at once it's broken down, said Dolly, smiling pensively and recalling her past with Stepan Arkadyevitch. Mamma, how did Papa make you an offer? Kitty asked suddenly. There was nothing out of the way. It was very simple, answered the princess, but her face beamed all over at the recollection. Oh, but how was it? You loved him, anyway, before you were allowed to speak? Kitty felt a peculiar pleasure in being able now to talk to her mother on equal terms about those questions of such paramount interest in a woman's life. Well, of course I did. He had come to stay with us in the country. But how was it settled between you, Mamma? You imagine, I dare say, that you invented something quite new? It's always just the same. It was settled by the eyes, by smiles. Oh, how nicely you said that, Mamma. It's just the eyes, by smiles. That's done it. But what words did he say? What did Kostya say to you? He wrote it in chalk. It was wonderful. How long ago it seems, she said. And the three women all fell to musing on the very same thing. Kitty was the first to break the silence. She remembered all that last winter before her marriage and her passion for Vronsky. There's one thing, that old love affair of Varenka's, she said, a natural chain of ideas bringing her to his point. I should have liked to say something to Sergei Ivanovitch, to prepare him. They're all men, I mean, she added, awfully jealous over our pasts. Not all, said Dolly. You judge by your own husband. It makes him miserable even now to remember Vronsky. That's true, isn't it? Yes, Kitty answered, a pensive smile in her eyes. But I don't know, the mother put in her defense in defense of her motherly care of her daughters, what there was in your past that could worry him. That Vronsky paid you attentions. That happens to every girl. Oh, yes, but we didn't mean that, Kitty said, flushing a little. No, tell me, her mother went on, why you yourself would not let me have a talk to Vronsky. Don't you remember? Oh, Mamma, said Kitty with an expression of suffering. There's no keeping you young people in check nowadays. Your friendship could not have gone beyond what was suitable. I should myself have called upon him to explain himself. But, my darling, it's not right for you to be agitated. Please remember that, and calm yourself. Oh, I'm perfectly calm, Maman. How happy it was for Kitty that Anna came then, said Dolly, and how unhappy for her. It turned out quite the opposite, she said, struck by her own ideas. That Anna was so happy, and Kitty thought herself unhappy. How it is just the opposite. I often think of her. How a nice person to think about. Horrid, repulsive woman. No heart, said her mother, who could not forget that Kitty had married not Vronsky, but Levin. What do you want to talk of it for? Kitty said with annoyance. I never think about it, and I don't want to think of it. And I don't want to think of it. And I don't think of it, she said, catching the sound of her husband's well-known step on the steps of the terrace. What's that you don't want to think about? Inquired Levin, coming into the terrace. But no one answered him, and he did not repeat the question. I'm sorry I've broken in on your feminine parliament, he said, looking round on everyone discontentedly, and perceiving that they had been talking of something which they would not talk about before him. For a second, he felt that he was sharing the feeling of Agafea Mikhailovna, vexation at their making jam without water, and altogether, at the outside, Sherbatskoy element. He smiled, however, and went up to Kitty. Well, how are you? He asked her, looking at her with the expression with which everyone looked at her now. Oh, very well, said Kitty, smiling. And how have things gone with you? The wagons held 3 times as much as the carts did. Well, are we going for the children? I've ordered the horses to be put in. What? You want to take Kitty in the wagonette? Her mother said reproachfully. Yes, at a walking pace, princess. Levin never called the princess maman, as men often do call their mothers-in-law, and the princess disliked his not doing so. But though he liked and respected the princess, Levin could not call her so without a sense of profaning his feeling for his dead mother. Oh, come with us, maman, said Kitty. I don't like to see such imprudence. Well, I'll walk then. I'm so well. Kitty got up and went to her husband and took his hand. You may be well, but everything in moderation, said the princess. Well, Agafea Mikhailovna, is the jam done? Said Levin, smiling to Agafea Mikhailovna and trying to cheer her up. Is it all right in the new way? I suppose it's all right for our notions. It's boiled too long. It'll be all the better, Agafea Mikhailovna. It won't mildew, even though our ice has begun to thaw already, so that we've no cool cellar to store it, said Kitty, at once divining her husband's motive and addressing the old housekeeper with the same feeling. But your pickle's so good that Mamma says she never tasted anything like it, she added, smiling and putting her kerchief straight. Agafea Mikhailovna looked angrily at Kitty. You needn't try to console me, mistress. I need only to look at you with him, and I feel happy, she said, and something in the rough familiarity of that with him touched Kitty. Come along with us to look for mushrooms. You will show us the best places. Agafea Mikhailovna smiled and shook her head as though to say, I should not. I should like to be angry with you two, but I can't. Do it, please, by my receipt, said the princess. Put some paper over the jam and moisten it with a little rum, and without even ice. It will never go mildewy. End of chapter 2. Right, chapter 2, we get slice of life with Kitty, her mom, and sister Dolly, who is married to Stepan Arkadyevich. And while Levin is out and about, we have these 3 ladies, and also Agafea. Agafea Mikhailovna is the, housekeeper, the house manager, and has been with Levin for forever. And she has done things in a very specific way, and now she is being told to make jam a different way. And so Agafea, wants the jam to fail. She so badly wants it to fail, but so far it's not, unfortunately, and she doesn't like that. And so she wants to be mad at Kitty, and Kitty knows that, and so she's also, being, nicer and why don't you come and, come mushroom hunting with us? You can show us all of the best things. And Agafea is like, I guess I can't be mad at you. Which I think is hilarious. She's in a jam. Exactly. But our three ladies, Princess, Kitty, and Dolly, are talking about matchmaking and also like their early relationships and how they became to be married and all of these things. And they're also talking about Sergei Ivanovich and his outlook like for suitors, that sort of thing. So, you know. And then we do talk about how women don't talk about their previous suitors because it makes their current like husband or partner or whatever upset. And then Levin comes in and they immediately stop talking about it because they were talking about Vronsky. Men are weird. Yes. Chapter 3. Kitty was particularly glad of a chance of being alone with her husband, for she had noticed the shade of mortification that had passed over his face, always so quick to reflect every feeling, at the moment when he had come onto the terrace and asked what they were talking of, and had got no answer. When they had set off on foot ahead of the others, and had come out of sight of the house onto the beaten, dusty road, marked with rusty wheels and sprinkled with grains of corn, she clung faster to his arm and pressed it closer to her. He had quite forgotten the momentary unpleasant impression, and alone with her he felt, now that the thought of her approaching mother-in-law was never for a moment absent from his mind, a new and delicious bliss, quite pure from all alloy of sense, in the being near to the woman he loved. There was no need of speech, yet he longed to hear the sound of her voice, which like her eyes had changed since she had been with child. In her voice, as in her eyes, there was that softness and gravity which was found in people continually concentrated on some cherished pursuit. "So, you're not tired? Lean more on me," said he. "No, I'm so glad of a chance of being alone with you, and I must own, though I'm happy with them, I do regret our winter evenings alone." "That was good, but this is even better. Both are better," he said, squeezing her hand. "Do you know what we were talking about when you came in?" "About jam?" "Oh, yes, about jam, too, but afterwards, about how men make offers." "Ah," said Levin, listening more to the sound of her voice than to the words she was saying, and all the while paying attention to the road, which passed now through the forest, and avoiding places where she might make a false step. "And about Sergei Ivanovich and Varenka. You've noticed? I'm very anxious for it," she went on. "What do you think about it?" And she peeped into his face. "I don't know what to think," Levin answered, smiling. "Sergei seems very strange to me in that way. I told you, you know." "Yes, that he was in love with that girl who died." "That was when I was a child. I know about it from hearsay and tradition. I remember him then. He was wonderfully sweet. But I've watched him since, with women. He is friendly. Some of them he likes, but one feels that to him they're simply people, not women." "Yes, but now with Varenka, I fancy there's something." "Perhaps there is, but one has to know him. He is a peculiar, wonderful person. He lives a spiritual life only. He's too pure, too exalted a nature." "Why? Would this lower him, then?" "No, but he's so used to a spiritual life that he can't reconcile himself with actual fact, and Varenka is, after all, fact." Levin had grown used by now to uttering his thought boldly, without taking the trouble of clothing it in exact language. He knew that his wife, in such moments of loving tenderness as now, would understand what he meant to say from a hint, and she did understand him. Yes, but there's not so much of that actual fact about her as about me. I can see that he would never have cared for me. She is altogether spiritual. Oh, no, he is so fond of you, and I am always so glad when my people like you. Yes, he's very nice to me, but it's not as it was with poor Nikolai. You really cared for each other, Levin finished. Why not speak of him? He added. I sometimes blame myself for it. It ends in one's forgetting how terrible and dear he was. Yes. What were we talking about? Levin said after a pause. You think he can't fall in love, said Kitty, translating into her own language. It's not so much that he can't fall in love, Levin said, smiling, but he has not the weakness necessary. I've always envied him, and even now when I'm so happy, I still envy him. You envy him for not being able to fall in love? I envy him for being better than I, said Levin. He does not live for himself. His whole life is subordinated to his duty, and that's why he can be calm and contented. And you? Kitty asked, with an ironical and loving smile. She could never have explained the chain of thought that made her smile, but the last link in it was that her husband, in exalting his brother and abasing himself, was not quite sincere. Kitty knew that this insincerity came from his love for his brother, from his sense of shame at being too happy, and above all from his unflagging craving to be better. She loved it in him, and so she smiled. And you? What are you dissatisfied with? She asked with the same smile. Her disbelief in his self-dissatisfaction delighted him, and unconsciously he tried to draw her into giving utterance to the grounds of her disbelief. I am happy, but dissatisfied with myself, he said. Why? How can you be dissatisfied with yourself if you are happy? Well, how can I say? In my heart, I really care for nothing whatever but that you should not stumble. See? Oh, but really, you mustn't skip about like that, he cried, breaking off to scold her for too agile a movement in stepping over a branch that lay in the path. But when I think about myself and compare myself with others, especially my brother, I feel I'm a poor creature. But in what way? Kitty pursued with the same smile. Don't you too work for others? What about your cooperative settlement, and your work on the estate, and your book? Oh, but I feel, and particularly just now, it's your fault, he said, passing her hand, that all that doesn't count. I do it in a way half-heartedly. If I could care for all that as I care for you. Instead of that, I do it in these days like a task that is set me. Well, what would you say about Papa? Asked Kitty. Is he a poor creature, then, as he does nothing for the public good? He? No. But then one must have the simplicity, the straightforwardness, the goodness of your father, and I haven't got that. I do nothing, and I fret about it. It's all your doing. Before there was you, and this, too, he added with a glance towards her waist that she understood. I put all my energies into work. Now I can't, and I'm ashamed. I do it just as though it were a task set me. I'm pretending. Well, what would you like to change this minute with Sergei Ivanovitch? Said Kitty. Would you like to do this work for the general good and to love the task set you as he does, and nothing else? Well, of course not, said Levin. But I'm so happy that I don't understand anything. So you think he'll make her an offer today? He added, after a brief silence. I think so. And I don't think so. Only I'm awfully anxious for it. Here, wait a minute. She stooped down and picked a wild chamomile at the edge of the path. Come, Count. He does propose? He doesn't, she said, giving him the flower. He does. He doesn't, said Levin, tearing off the white petals. No, no! Kitty, snatching at his hand, stopped him. She had been watching his fingers with interest. You picked off 2. Oh, but see, this little one shan't count to make up, said Levin, tearing off a little half-grown petal. Here's the wagonette overtaking us. Are you tired, Kitty? Called the princess. Not in the least. If you are, you can get in, as the hero horses are quiet and walking. But it was not worthwhile to get in. They were quite near the place, and all walked on together. End of chapter 3. All right, chapter 3, we have Levin and Kitty on their walk, and it's nice for them to have a little breather with just themselves, and they don't have to worry about all the outside world expectations and the expectations hoisted on them by their families. So they're just like taking a little moment, and Kitty actually does tell Levin what they were talking about when he walked onto the terrace, and they all just like stopped. And so they're talking about Sergei Ivanovich, and Levin reveals that he does not feel adequate. And Kitty's like, well, what are you talking about? And Levin goes on to say, like, I am changing my responsibilities. I'm mostly concerned about you, and the things that I'm doing that concern you, I'm doing wholeheartedly and really well, but I'm not doing things that benefit the greater good. And so he's, beating himself up a little bit about that, and Kitty is just sort of like asking not pointed questions, but questions to like bring out like, Levin, stop being so deprecating. You're okay, bud. And then as they're talking, the wagonette, which Kitty's mama is in, like pulls up next to them and is like, oh, do you want to hop in? Because Kitty is with child, so everybody is very concerned about her condition, which has been mentioned many a times. And yeah, exactly. Tolerable Levin. What? Excuse me? Poor Levin. Sometimes I'm like, oh, Levin, bud. And then other times I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Chapter 4. Varenka, with her white handkerchief on her black hair, surrounded by the children, gaily and good-humoredly looking after them, and at the same time visibly excited at the possibility of receiving a declaration from the man she cared for, was very attractive. Sergei Ivanovich walked beside her and never left off admiring her. Looking at her, he recalled all the delightful things he had heard from her lips, all the good he knew about her, and became more and more conscious that the feeling he had for her was something special, that he had felt long ago, and only once in his early youth. The feeling of happiness in being near her continually grew, and at last reached such a point that, as he put a huge, slender-stalked agaric fungus in her basket, he looked straight into her face, and noticing the flush of glad and alarmed excitement that overspread her face, he was confused himself, and smiled. To her in silence, a smile that said too much. If so, he said to himself, I ought to think it over and make up my mind and not give way, like a boy, to the impulse of a moment. I'm going to pick by myself apart from all the rest, or else my efforts will make no show, he said, and he left the edge of the forest, where they were walking on low, silky grass, between old birch trees standing far apart, and went more into the heart of the wood, where between the white birch trunks there were gray trunks of aspen and dark bushes of hazel. Walking some 40 paces away, Sergei Ivanovich, knowing he was out of sight, stood still behind a bushy spindle tree in full flower with its rosy red catkins. It was perfectly still all around him. Only overhead in the birches under which he stood, the flies, like a swarm of bees, buzzed unceasingly, and from time to time the children's voices were floated across to him. All at once he heard, not far from the edge of the wood, the sound of Varenka's contralto voice calling Grisha, and a smile of delight passed over Sergei Ivanovitch's face. Conscious of this smile, he shook his head disapprovingly at his own condition, and taking out a cigar, he began lighting it. For a long while he could not get a match to light against the trunk of a birch tree. The soft scales of the white bark rubbed off the phosphorus, and the light went out. At last one of the matches burned, and the fragrant cigar smoke, hovering uncertainly in flat, wide coils, stretched away forwards and upwards over a bush under the overhanging branches of a birch tree. Watching the streak of smoke, Sergei Ivanovitch walked gently on, deliberately, on his position. Why not? He thought. If it were only a passing fancy or a passion, if it were only this attraction, this mutual attraction, I can call it a mutual attraction. But if I felt that it was in contradiction with the whole bent of my life, if I felt that in giving way to this attraction I should be false to my vocation and my duty, but it's not so. The only thing I can say against it is that, when I lost Marie, I said to myself that I would remain faithful to her memory. That's the only thing I can say against my feeling. That's a great thing, Sergei Ivanovitch said to himself, feeling at the same time that this consideration had not the slightest importance for him personally, but would only perhaps detract from his romantic character in the eyes of others. But apart from that, however much I searched, I should never find anything to say against my feeling. If I were choosing by considerations of suitability alone, I could not have found anything better. However many women and girls he thought of whom he knew, he could not think of a girl who united to such a degree positively all, the qualities he would wish to see in his wife. She had all the charm and freshness of youth, but she was not a child, and if she loved him consciously, as a woman ought to love. That was one thing. Another point, she was not only far from being worldly, but had an unmistakable distaste for worldly society. And at the same time, she knew the world and had all the ways of a woman of this best society, which were absolutely essential to Sergei Ivanovitch's conception of the woman who was to share his life. Thirdly, she was religious, and not like a child, unconsciously religious and good, as Kitty, for example, was, but her life was founded on religious principles. Even in trifling matters, Sergei Ivanovitch found in her all that he wanted in his wife. She was poor and alone in the world, so she would not bring with her a mass of relations and their influence into her husband's house, as he saw now in Kitty's case. She would owe everything to her husband, which was what he had always desired for his future family life. And this girl, who united all these qualities, loved him. He was a modest man, but he could not help seeing it, and he loved her. There was one consideration against it, his age. But he came of a long-lived family. He had not a single gray hair. No one would have taken him for 40, and he remembered Varenka's saying that it was only in Russia that men of 50 thought themselves old, and that in France a man of 50 considers himself dans les forces de l'âge, while a man of 40 is un jeune homme. But What did the mere reckoning of years matter when he felt as young in heart as he had been 20 years ago? Was it not youth to feel as he felt now? When coming from the other side to the edge of the wood, he saw in the glowing light of the slanting sunbeams the gracious figure of Varenka in her yellow gown with her basket, walking lightly by the trunk of an old birch tree. And when this impression of the sight of Varenka blended so harmoniously with the beauty of the view, of the yellow oat field lying bathed in the slanting sunshine, and beyond it, the distant ancient forest flecked with yellow and melting into the blue of the distance. His heart throbbed joyously. A softened feeling came over him. He felt that he had made up his mind. Varenka, who had just crouched down to pick a mushroom, rose with a supple movement and looked round. Flinging away the cigar, Sergei Ivanovich advanced with resolute steps towards her. End of chapter 4. All right, so we have left Levin and Kitty. Great, because they're not my favorites. And we are now over with Sergei Ivanovich and Varenka, and they are mushroom hunting. And we get internal thoughts of Sergei. And he is just, going back and forth, and we get a list of what he enjoys about Varenka, both, not logistically, but on paper, like the good things, like, oh, well, she is poor and doesn't come from a huge family, and there won't be, like, all of this hullabaloo like there is with Kitty and Levin. But also, he states, like, he has this feeling that he has not felt since he was very, very young, and he loves her and knows that she loves him. And so at the end of it, we get this, resolution from Sergei Ivanovich. And it is interesting because Levin, in the previous chapter, also mentioned that Sergei Ivanovich has not really taken notice of women. He just sees them as people, not as, future partners or anything like that. And he had this, this young love, and she died. So ever since then, he just really hasn't had anybody. So here we are. Chapter 5. Varvara Andreevna. When I was very young, I set before myself the ideal of the woman I loved and should be happy to call my wife. I have lived through a long life, and now for the first time I have met what I sought in you. I love you, and offer you my hand. Sergei Ivanovich was saying this to himself while he was 10 paces from Varvara, kneeling down with her hands over the mushrooms to guard them from Grisha. She was calling little Masha. "Come here, little ones. Oh, there are so many," she was saying in her sweet, deep voice. Seeing Sergei Ivanovich approaching, she did not get up and did not change her position, but everything told him that she felt his presence and was glad of it. "Well, did you find some?" she asked from under the white kerchief, turning her handsome, gently smiling face to him. "Not one," said Sergei Ivanovich. "Did you?" She did not answer, busy with the children who thronged about her. "That one, too, near the twig," she pointed out to little Masha, a little fungus split in half across its rosy cap by the dry grass from under which it thrust itself. Varenka got up while Masha picked the fungus, breaking it into 2 white halves. "This brings back my childhood," she added, moving apart from the children beside Sergei Ivanovich. They walked on for some steps in silence. Varenka saw that he wanted to speak. She guessed of what and felt faint with joy and panic. They had walked so far away that no one could hear them now, but still he did not begin to speak. It would have been better for Varenka to be silent. After a silence, it would have been easier for them to say what they wanted to say than after talking about mushrooms. But, against her own will, as it were accidentally, Varenka said, "So you found nothing. In the middle of the woods there are always fewer, though." Sergei Ivanovich sighed and made no answer. He was annoyed that she had spoken about the mushrooms. He wanted to bring her back to the first words she had uttered about her childhood, but after a pause of some length, as though against his own will, he made an observation in response to her last words. "I have heard that the white edible funguses are found principally at the edges of the wood, though I can't tell them apart." Some minutes more passed. They moved still farther away from the children and were quite alone. Varenka's heart throbbed so that she heard it beating, and felt that she was turning red and pale, and red again. To be the wife of a man like Kuznetsov, after her position with Madame Stahl, was to her imagination the height of happiness. Besides, she was almost certain that she was in love with him, and this moment it would have to be decided. She felt frightened. She dreaded both his speaking and his not speaking. Now or never, it must be said that Sergei Ivanovich felt too. Everything in the expression, the flushed cheeks and the downcast eyes of Varenka, betrayed a painful suspense. Sergei Ivanovich saw it and felt sorry for her. He felt even that to say nothing now would be a slight to her. Rapidly, in his own mind, he ran over all the arguments in support of his decision. He even said over to himself the words in which he meant to put his offer. But instead of those words, some utterly unexpected reflection that occurred to him made him ask, "What's the difference between the birch mushrooms and the white mushrooms?" Varenka's lips quivered with emotion as she answered, "In the top part there is scarcely any difference. It's in the stalk." And as soon as these words were uttered, both he and she felt that it was over, that what was to have been said would not be said, and their emotion, which had up to then been continually growing more intense, began to subdue. "The birch mushroom's stalk suggests a dark man's chin after 2 days without shaving," said Sergei Ivanovich, speaking quite calmly now. "Yes, that's true," answered Varenka, smiling, and unconsciously the direction of their walk changed. They began to turn towards the children. Varenka felt both sore and ashamed. At the same time, she had a sense of relief. When he had got home again and went over the whole subject, Sergei Ivanovich thought his previous decision had been a mistaken one. He could not be false to the memory of Marie. "Gently, children, gently," Levin shouted quite angrily to the children, standing before his wife to protect her, when the crowd of children flew with shrieks of delight to meet them. Behind the children, Sergei Ivanovich and Varenka walked out of the wood. Kitty had no need to ask Varenka. She saw from the calm and somewhat crestfallen faces of both that her plans had not come off. "Well?" her husband questioned her as they were going home again. "It doesn't bite," said Kitty, her smile and manner of speaking recalling her father, a likeness Levin often noticed with pleasure. "How doesn't bite?" "I'll show you," she said, taking her husband's hand, lifting it to her mouth and just faintly brushing it with closed lips, like a kiss on a priest's hand. "Which doesn't it bite with?" he said, laughing. "Both. But it should have been like this. There are some peasants coming." "They didn't see." End of chapter 5. All right, so Sergei is like, "All right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. He like hypes himself up, and he can't. He can't. He can't. The moment just doesn't align, and so they just continue talking about mushrooms, and neither one of them really want to be talking about mushrooms, but they just both do, and they can't stop themselves from asking questions about mushrooms and just, being able to distinguish between the different types of mushrooms, and then they leave both knowing, both Varenka and Sergei knowing it's just gonna go unsaid. Oops. And then Kitty and Levin are there, and Kitty knows immediately that it didn't happen just by looking at Varenka's face. And that was the chapter. Chapter 6. During the time of the children's tea, the grown-up people sat in the balcony and talked as though nothing had happened, though they all, especially Sergei Ivanovich and Varenka, were very well aware that there had happened an event which, though negative, was of very great importance. They both had the same feeling, rather like that of a schoolboy after an examination, which has left him in the same class or shut him out of the school forever. Everyone present, feeling too that something had happened, talked eagerly about extraneous subjects. Levin and Kitty were particularly happy and conscious of their love that evening, and their happiness in their love seemed to imply a disagreeable slur on those who would have liked to feel the same and could not, and they felt a prick of conscience. "Mark my words, Alexander will not come," said the old princess. That evening, they were expecting Stepan Arkadyevitch to come down by train, and the old prince had written that possibly he might come too. "And I know why," the princess went on. "He says that young people ought to be left alone for a while at first." "But Papa left us alone. We've never seen him," said Kitty. "Besides, we're not young people. We're old, married people by now." "Only, if he doesn't come, I shall say goodbye to you children," said Princess, sighing mournfully. What nonsense, Mamma." Both the daughters fell upon her at once. "How do you suppose he is feeling? Why, now—" And suddenly there was an unexpected quiver in the princess's voice. Her daughters were silent and looked at one another. "Mamma always finds something to be miserable about," they said in that glance. They did not know that, happy as the princess was in her daughter's house and useful as she felt herself to be there, she had been extremely miserable, both on her own account and her husband's, ever since they had married their last and favorite daughter, and the old home had been left empty. "What is it, Agafea Mikhailovna?" Kitty asked suddenly of Agafea Mikhailovna, who was standing with a mysterious air and a face full of meaning. "About supper." "Well, that's right," said Dolly. "You go and arrange about it, and I'll go and hear Grisha repeat his lesson, or else he will have nothing done all day." "That's my lesson. No, Dolly, I'm going," said Levin, jumping up. Grisha, who was by now at a high school, had to go over the lessons of the term in the summer holidays. Darya Alexandrovna, who had been studying Latin with her son in Moscow before, had made it a rule on coming to the Levins to go over with him, at least once a day, the most difficult lessons of Latin and arithmetic. Levin had offered to take her place, but the mother, having once overheard Levin's lesson, and noticing that it was not given exactly as the teacher in Moscow had given it, said resolutely, though with much embarrassment and anxiety not to mortify Levin, that they must keep strictly to the book as the teacher had done, and that she had better undertake it again herself. Levin was amazed, both at Stepan Arkadyevitch, who, by neglecting his duty, threw upon the mother the supervision of studies of which she had no comprehension, and at the teachers for teaching the children so badly. But he promised his sister-in-law to give the lessons exactly as she wished, and he went on teaching Grisha, not in his own way, but by the book, and so took little interest in it, and often forgot the hour of the lesson. So it had been today. "No, I'm going, Dolly. You sit still," he said. "We'll do it all properly, like the book. Only when Stiva comes and we go out shooting, then we shall have to miss it." And Levin went to Grisha. Varenka was saying the same thing to Kitty. Even in the happy, well-ordered house of the Levins, Varenka had succeeded in making herself useful. "Oh, I'll see to the supper. You sit still," she said, and got up to go to Agafea Mikhailovna. Yes, most likely they've not been able to get chickens. If so, Agafea Mikhailovna and I will see about it," said Varenka, vanishing with her. "What a nice girl," said the princess. "Not nice, maman. She's an exquisite girl. There's no one else like her." "So, you are expecting Stepan Arkadyevitch today?" said Sergei Ivanovich, evidently not disposed to pursue the conversation about Varenka. "It would be difficult to find two son-in-laws more unlike than yours," he said with a subtle smile. "One all-movement, only living in society like a fish in water. The other, our Kostya, living, alert, quick in everything, but as soon as he is in society, he either sinks into apathy or struggles helplessly, like a fish on land." "Yes, he's very heedless," said the princess, addressing Sergei Ivanovich. "I've been meaning, indeed, to ask you to tell him that it's out of the question for her," she indicated Kitty, "to stay here, that she positively must come to Moscow. He talks of getting a doctor down." "Maman, he'll do everything. He has agreed to everything," Kitty said, angry with her mother for appealing to Sergei Ivanovich to judge in such a matter. In the middle of their conversation, they heard the snorting of horses and the sound of wheels on the gravel. Dolly had not time to get up to go and meet her husband, when from the window of the room below, where Grisha was having his lesson, Levin leaped out and helped Grisha out after him. "It's Stiva," Levin shouted from under the balcony. "We've finished, Dolly, don't be afraid," he added, and started running like a boy to meet the carriage. "Is jus," shouted Grisha, skipping along the avenue. "And someone else, too. Papa, of course," cried Levin, stopping at the entrance of the avenue. "Kitty, don't come down the steep staircase. Go round." But Levin had been mistaken in taking the person sitting in the carriage for the old prince. As he got nearer to the carriage, he saw beside Stepan Arkadyevitch not the prince, but a handsome, stout young man in a Scotch cap with long ends of ribbon behind. This was Vasenka Veslovsky, a distant cousin of the Sherbatskoys, a brilliant young gentleman in Petersburg and Moscow society. "A capital fellow and a keen sportsman," said Stepan Arkadyevitch as he introduced him. Not a whit abashed by the disappointment caused by his having come in place of the old prince, Veslovsky greeted Levin happily, claiming acquaintance with him in the past, and snatching up Grisha into the carriage, lifted him over the pointer that Stepan Arkadyevitch had brought with him. Levin did not get into the carriage, but walked behind. He was rather vexed at the non-arrival of the old prince, whom he liked more and more the more he saw of him, and also at the arrival of his Vasenka Veslovsky, a quite uncongenial and superfluous person. He seemed to him still more uncongenial and superfluous when, on approaching the steps where the whole party, children and grown-up, were gathered together in much excitement, Levin saw Vasenka Veslovsky with a particularly warm and gallant air, kissing Kitty's hand. "Your wife and I are cousins and very good friends," said Vasenka Veslovsky, once more shaking Levin's hand with great warmth. "Well, are there plenty of birds?" Stepan Arkadyevitch said to Levin, hardly leaving time for everyone to utter their gatherings. "We've come with the most savage intentions. Why, maman, they've not been in Moscow since. Look, Tanya, here's something for you. Get it, please. It's in the carriage behind." He talked in all directions. "How pretty you've grown, Dolly," he said to his wife, once more kissing her hand, holding it in one of his and patting it with the other. Levin, who a minute before had been in the happiest frame of mind, now looked darkly at everyone, and everything displeased him. "Who was it he kissed yesterday with those lips?" he thought, looking at Stepan Arkadyevitch's tender demonstrations to his wife. He looked at Dolly, and he did not like her either. She doesn't believe in his love. So what is she so pleased about? Revolting, thought Levin. He looked at the princess who had been so dear to him a minute before, and he did not like the manner in which she welcomed this Vasenka, with his ribbons, just as though she were in his own house. Even Sergei Ivanovitch, who had come out too onto the steps, seemed to him unpleasant with the show of cordiality with which he met Stepan Arkadyevitch, though Levin knew that his brother neither liked nor respected Oblonsky. And Varenka, even she seemed hateful, with her air sans nitouche, making the acquaintance of this gentleman, while all the while she was thinking of nothing but getting married. And more hateful than anyone was Kitty, for falling in with the tone of gaiety with which this gentleman regarded his visit in the country, as though it were a holiday for himself and everyone else. And, above all, unpleasant was that particular smile with which she responded to his smile. Noisily talking, they all went into the house. But as soon as they were all seated, Levin turned and went out. Kitty saw something was wrong with her husband. She tried to seize a moment to speak to him alone, but he made haste to get away from her, saying he was wanted at the counting house. It was long since his own work on the estate had seemed to him so important as at that moment. It's all holiday for them, he thought. But these are no holiday matters. They won't wait, and there's no living without them. End of chapter 6. All right, Levin has just become ants at a picnic. He's just, sometimes you feel sorry for him, and other times you're just like, Levin, can you just? So the group is all now gathered, and there is a commentary about how the children are being taught now that they are like on holiday away from Moscow, and Mama is like very particular in how they should be taught, just like the teacher back at home. And we, from previous readings, know that Levin does not value the same education that they do, and so he thinks it's a waste of time for them to be even having an education, let alone learning Latin. So it's funny that like when he's in charge of the education or when he's in charge of the lessons, he's just like going off the rails, and so like being called out, I think is kind of funny. But we do get Stepan Arkadyevitch, who is Dolly or Daria. Does she have other names? I don't know. Those are the two. Her husband, and he is there, and we think that it might be the old prince, who is Kitty and Daria's dad, but it is not. It is this other guy. And immediately, Levin is displeased. He's displeased with how Stepan Arkadyevitch is being met, and received warmly by everybody. And he's like, "Ah, this guy. And he is also upset about this guest. And so to just be by himself, he's like, I'm gonna go work. They all think that this is a holiday, but there's work to be done, and if the work isn't done, then blah 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 blah. So that's Levin, just being Levin. In case we forgot what he's like. All right. Chapter 7. Levin came back to the house only when they sent to summon him to supper. On the stairs were standing Kitty and Agafea Mikhailovna, consulting about wines for supper. But why are you making all this fuss? Have what we usually do. No, Stiva doesn't drink. Kostya, stop. What's the matter? Kitty began, hurrying after him, but he strode ruthlessly away to the dining room without waiting for her, and at once joined in the lively general conversation which was being maintained there by Vasenka Veslovsky and Stepan Arkadyevitch. Well, what do you say? Are we going shooting tomorrow? Said Stepan Arkadyevitch. Please, do let's go, said Veslovsky, moving to another chair, where he sat down sideways with one fat leg crossed under him. I shall be delighted. We will go. And have you had any shooting yet this year? Said Levin to Veslovsky, looking intently at his leg, but speaking with that forced amiability that Kitty knew so well in him, and that was so out of keeping with him. I can't answer for our finding grouse, but there are plenty of snipe, only we ought to start early. You're not tired, aren't you, Stiva? Me? Tired? I've never been tired yet. Suppose we stay up all night. Let's go for a walk. Yes, really, let's not go to bed at all. Capital, Veslovsky chimed in. Oh, we all know you can do without sleep and keep other people up too, said Dolly to her husband, with that faint note of irony in her voice which she almost always had now with her husband. But to my thinking, it's time for bed now. I'm going. I don't want supper. No, do stay a little, Dolly, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, going round to her side beside the table where they were having supper. I've so much still to tell you. Nothing, really, I suppose. Do you know Veslovsky has been at Anna's, and he's going to them again? You know they're hardly 50 miles from you, and I, too, must certainly go over there. Veslovsky, come here. Vasenka crossed over to the ladies and sat down beside Kitty. Ah, do tell me, please. You have stayed with her. How is she? Darya Alexandrovna appealed to him. Levin was left at the other end of the table, and though never pausing in his conversation with the princess and Varenka, he saw that there was an eager and mysterious conversation going on between Stepan Arkadyevitch, Dolly, Kitty, and Veslovsky. And that was not all. He saw on his wife's face an expression of real feeling as she gazed with fixed eyes on the handsome face of Vasenka, who was telling them something with great animation. It's exceedingly nice at their place, Veslovsky was telling them about Vronsky and Anna. I can't, of course, take it upon myself to judge, but in their house you feel the real feeling of home. What do they intend? Well, I do believe they think of going to Moscow. How jolly it would be for all to go over to them together. When are you going there? Stepan Arkadyevitch asked Vasenka. I'm spending July there. Will you go? Stepan Arkadyevitch said to his wife. Well, I've been wanting to go for a while. I shall certainly go, said Dolly. I am sorry for her, and I know her. She's a splendid woman. I will go alone. when you go back, and then I shall be in no one's way, and it will be better indeed without you." "To be sure," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "And you, Kitty?" "I? Why should I go?" Kitty said, flushing all over, and she glanced round at her husband. "Do you know Anna Arkadyevna, then?" Veslovsky asked her. "She's a very fascinating woman." "Oh, yes," she answered Veslovsky, crimsoning still more. She got up and walked across to her husband. "Are you going shooting, then, tomorrow?" she said. His jealousy had, in these few moments, especially at the flush that had overspread her cheeks while she was talking to Veslovsky, gone far, indeed. Now, as he heard her words, he construed them in his own fashion. Strange as it was to him afterwards to recall it, it seemed to him at the moment clear that in asking whether he was going shooting, all she cared to know was whether he would give that pleasure to Vasenka Veslovsky, with whom, as he fancied, she was in love. "Yes, I'm going," he answered her in an unnatural voice, disagreeable to himself. No, better spend the day here tomorrow, or Dolly won't see anything of her husband and set off the day after," said Kitty. The motive of Kitty's words was interpreted by Levin thus: "Don't separate me from him. I don't care about your going, but do let me enjoy the society of this delightful young man." "If you wish, we'll stay here tomorrow," Levin answered with peculiar amiability. Vasenka, meanwhile, utterly unsuspecting the misery his presence had occasioned, got up from the table after Kitty, and watching her with smiling and admiring eyes, he followed her. Levin saw that look. He turned white, and for a minute he could hardly breathe. "How dare he look at my wife like that?" was the feeling that boiled within him. "Tomorrow, then. Do, please, let us go," said Vasenka, sitting down on a chair and again crossing his leg as his habit was. Levin's jealousy went further still. Already he saw himself a deceived husband, looked upon by his wife and her lover as simply necessary to provide them with the conveniences and pleasures of life. But in spite of that, he made polite and hospitable inquiries of Vasenka about his shooting, his gun, and his boots, and agreed to go shooting next day. Happily for Levin, the old princess cut short his agonies by getting up herself and advising Kitty to go to bed. But even at this point, Levin could not escape another agony. As he said good night to his hostess, Vasenka would again have kissed her hand, but Kitty, reddening, drew back her hand and said with a naive bluntness, for which the old princess scolded her afterwards, "We don't like that fashion." In Levin's eyes, she was to blame for having allowed such relations to arise, and still more to blame for showing so awkwardly that she did not like them. "Why, how can one want to go to bed?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, who, after drinking several glasses of wine at supper, was now in his most charming and sentimental humor. "Look, Kitty," he said, pointing to the moon, which had just risen behind the lime trees. "How exquisite!" "Veslovsky, this is the time for a serenade. You know, he has a splendid voice. We practiced songs together along the road. He has brought some lovely songs with him, 2 new ones, Varvara Andreevna, and he must sing some duets." When the party had broken up, Stepan Arkadyevitch walked a long while about the avenue with Veslovsky. Their voices could be heard singing one of the new songs. Levin, hearing these voices, sat scowling in an easy chair in his wife's bedroom and maintained an obstinate silence when she asked him what was wrong. But when at last, with a timid glance, she hazarded the question, "Was there perhaps something you disliked about Veslovsky? It all burst out, and he told her all. He was humiliated himself at what he was saying, and that exasperated him all the more. He stood facing her with his eyes glittering menacingly under his scowling brows, and he squeezed his strong arms across his chest, as though he were straining every nerve to hold himself in. The expression of his face would have been grim and even cruel if it had not at the same time had a look of suffering which touched her. His jaws were twitching, and his voice kept breaking. You must understand that I'm not jealous. That's a nasty word. I can't be jealous, and believe that. I can't say what I feel, but this is awful. I'm not jealous, but I'm wounded, humiliated, that anybody dare think, that anybody dare look at you with eyes like that. Eyes like what? Said Kitty, trying as conscientiously as possible to recall every word and gesture of that evening and every shade implied in them. At the very bottom of her heart, she did think there had been something precisely at the moment when he had crossed over after her to the other end of the table, but she dared not own it even to herself, and would have been even more unable to bring herself to say so to him, and so increase his suffering. And what can there possibly be attractive about me as I am now? Ah, he cried, clutching at his head. You shouldn't say that. If you have been attractive then... Kostya, wait a minute. Do listen, she said, looking at him with an expression of pained commiseration. Why, what can you be thinking about, when for me there's no one in the world, no one. No one. Would you like me never to see anyone? For the first moment she had been offended at his jealousy. She was angry that the slightest amusement, even the most innocent, should be forbidden to her. But now she would readily have sacrificed not merely such trifles, but everything, for his peace of mind, to save him from the agony he was suffering. You must understand the horror and comedy of my position, he went on in a desperate whisper. That he's in my house, that he's done nothing improper positively except his free and easy airs and the way he sits on his legs. He thinks it's the best possible form, and so I'm obliged to be civil to him. But Kostya, you're exaggerating, said Kitty, at the bottom of her heart, rejoicing at the depth of his love for her, shown now in his jealousy. The most awful part of it all is that you're just as you always are, and especially now, when to me you're something sacred, and we're so happy, so particularly happy, and all of a sudden, a little wretch. He's not a little wretch. Why should I abuse him? I have nothing to do with him, but why should my, and your, happiness? Do you know? I understand now what it's all come from, Kitty was beginning. Well, what? What? I saw how you looked while we were talking at supper. Well, said Levin, in dismay. She told him what they had been talking about, and as she told him, she was breathless with emotion. Levin was silent for a space. Then he scanned her pale and distressed face, and suddenly he clutched at his head. Katya, I've been worrying you. Darling, forgive me. It's madness. Katya, I'm a criminal. And how could you be so distressed at such idiocy? I was sorry for you. For me. For how mad I am. But why make you miserable? It's awful to think that any outsider can shatter our happiness. It's humiliating, too. Then I'll keep him here all the summer, and will overwhelm him with civility, said Levin, kissing her hands. You shall see, tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow we are going. End of chapter 7. Okay. Chapter 7. Levin is just insanely jealous, and he's mad that he's jealous because it's just so silly. He's like, this guy comes in here and has been nothing but civil, nothing but nice and welcoming and warm, and I hate him. And so he's talking, about. I'm glad that he's actually saying something, because I thought that it was going to fall into like a discussion that never happened, and that it just like bubbles, slowly boils until it like erupts and boils over and becomes something that's so much larger. But Kitty does ask, like, hey, I noticed that something's going on. What's wrong with you? And Levin actually does say it. And I think he deserves props for that. However, just because they're talking does not mean that anything is happening. Does not mean that she is just magically fallen in love with him. It's fine. But then she realizes, like, oh, we had a private conversation that he was not part of. This is what our conversation was, and goes on to talk about Anna Karenina, and Vronsky. So that's where we ended there. Chapter 8. Next day, before the ladies were up, the wagonette and a trap for the shooting party were at the door, and Laska, aware since early morning that they were going shooting, after much whining and darting to and fro, had sat herself down in the wagonette beside the coachman, and, disapproving of the delay, was excitedly watching the door from which the sportsman still did not come out. The first to come out was Vasenka Veslovsky, in new high boots that reached halfway up his thick thighs, in a green blouse, with a new Russian leather cartridge belt, and in his Scotch cap with ribbons, and a brand new English gun along a sling. Laska flew up to him, welcomed him, and, jumping up, asked him in her own way whether the others were coming soon. But getting no answer from him, she returned to her post of observation and sank into repose again, her head on one side, and one ear pricked up to listen. At last the door opened with a creak, and Stepan Arkadyevitch's spot and tan pointer Crack flew out, running round and turning over in the air. Stepan Arkadyevitch himself followed with a gun in his hand and a cigar in his mouth. Good dog, Crack," he cried encouragingly to the dog, who put his paws up on his chest, catching at his game bag. Stepan Arkadyevitch was dressed in rough leggings and spats, in torn trousers and a short coat. On his head there was a wreck of a hat of indefinite form, but his gun of a new patent was a perfect gem, and his game bag and cartridge belt, though worn, were of the very best quality. Vasenka Veslovsky had had no notion before that it was truly chic for a sportsman to be in tatters, but to have his shooting outfit of the best quality. He saw it now as he looked at Stepan Arkadyevitch, radiant in his rags, graceful, well-fed, and joyous, a typical Russian nobleman. And he made up his mind that next time he went shooting, he would certainly adopt the same get-up. "Well, and what about our host?" he asked. "A young wife," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, smiling. "Yes, and such a charming one. He came down dressed. No doubt he's run up to her again." Stepan Arkadyevitch guessed right. Levin had run up again to his wife to ask her once more if she forgave him for his idiocy yesterday, and, moreover, to beg her for Christ's sake to be more careful. The great thing was for her to keep away from the children. They might any minute push against her. Then he had once more to hear her declare that she was not angry with him for going away for 2 days, and to beg her to be sure to send him a note next morning by a servant on horseback, to write him, if it were but 2 words only, to let him know that all was well. Kitty was distressed, as she always was, at parting for a couple of days from her husband. But when she saw his eager figure, looking big and strong in his shooting boots and his white blouse, and a sort of sportsman elation and excitement incomprehensible to her, She forgot her own chagrin for the sake of his pleasure, and said goodbye to him cheerfully. "Pardon, gentlemen," he said, running out onto the steps. "Have you put the lunch in? Why is the chestnut on the right? Well, it doesn't matter. Laska, down. Go and lay down." "Put it in the herd of oxen," he said to the herdsman, who was waiting for him at the steps with some questions. "Excuse me, here comes another villain." Levin jumped out of the wagonette, in which he had already taken his seat, to meet the carpenter, who came towards the steps with a rule in his hand. "You didn't come to the counting house yesterday, and now you're detaining me. Well, what is it?" "Would your honor let me make another turning? It's only 3 steps to add, and we make it just fit at the same time. It will be much more convenient." "You should have listened to me," Levin answered with annoyance. "I said, put the lines and then fit in the steps. Now there's no setting it right. Do as I told you and make a new staircase." The point was that in the lodge that was being built, the carpenter has spoiled the staircase, fitting it together without calculating the space it was to fill, so that the steps were all sloping when it was put in place. Now the carpenter wanted, keeping the same staircase, to add 3 steps. "It will be much better." "But where's your staircase coming out with its 3 steps?" "Why, upon my word, sir," the carpenter said with a contemptuous smile, "it comes out right at the very spot it starts, so to speak," he said with a persuasive gesture. "It comes down and goes down and comes out." "But 3 steps will add to the length, too. Where is it to come out?" "Why, to be sure, it'll start from the bottom and go up and go up and come out so," the carpenter said, obstinately and convincingly. "It'll reach the ceiling and the wall. Upon my word, why, it'll go up and up, come out like this." Levin took out a ramrod and began sketching him the staircase in the dust. "There, do you see?" "As your honor likes," said the carpenter with a sudden gleam in his eyes, obviously understanding the thing at last. "It seems it'll be best to make a new one." "Well then, do it as you're told," Levin shouted, seating himself in the wagonette. "Down! Hold the dogs, Philip." Levin felt now, at leaving behind all his family and household cares, such an eager sense of joy in life and expectation that he was not disposed to talk. Besides that, he had that feeling of concentrated excitement that every sportsman experiences as he approaches the scene of action. If he had anything on his mind at that moment, it was only the doubt whether they would start anything in the Kolpensky marsh, whether Laska would show to advantage in comparison with Krak, and whether he would shoot well that day himself. Not to disgrace himself before a new spectator, not to be outdone by Oblonsky, that too was a thought that crossed his brain. Oblonsky was feeling the same, and he too was not talkative. Vasenka Veslovsky kept up alone at ceaseless flow of cheerful chatter. As he listened to him now, Levin felt ashamed to think how unfair he had been to him the day before. Vasenka was really a nice fellow, simple, good-hearted, and very good-humored. If Levin had met him before he was married, he would have made friends with him. Levin rather disliked his holiday attitude to life and a sort of free and easy assumption of elegance. It was as though he assumed a high degree of importance in himself that could not be disputed, because he had long nails and a stylish cap, and everything else to correspond. But this could be forgiven for the sake of his good nature and good breeding. Levin liked him for his good education, for speaking French and English with such an excellent accent, and for being a man of his word. Vasenka was extremely delighted with the left horse, a horse of the Don steppes. He kept praising him enthusiastically. "How fine it must be galloping over the steppes on a steppe horse, isn't it?" he said. He had imagined riding on a steppe horse as something wild and romantic, but it turned out nothing of the sort. but his simplicity, particularly in conjunction with his good looks, his amiable smile, and the grace of his movements, was very attractive. Either because his nature was simplistic to Levin, or because Levin was trying to atone for his sins of the previous evening by seeing nothing but what was good in him. Anyway, he liked his society. After they had driven over 2 miles from home, Veslovsky all at once felt for a cigar and his pocketbook, and did not know whether he had lost them or left them on the table. In the pocketbook there were 37 pounds, and so the matter could not be left in uncertainty. Do you know what, Levin? I'll gallop home on that left trace horse. That will be splendid, he said, preparing to get out. No, why should you? Answered Levin, calculating that Vasenka could hardly weigh less than 17 stone. I'll send the coachman. The coachman rode back on the trace horse, and Levin himself drove the remaining pair. End of chapter 8. All right, so the boys have gone out on a hunting adventure. They have just left. And Levin is starting to be like, all right, well, I guess this guy isn't so bad. I guess he's fine. And before he leaves, Levin is the one who's holding them up, because he runs back upstairs to talk to Kitty to be like, all right, you need to be careful. You are with child, so guard yourself. Don't let all of these children run up to you, because they might, like, push you or, like, shove you a little bit, and that can't be. And then Kitty also reconfirmed that she does not have the hots for the guest, and doesn't want to be with anybody else but with Levin. And now Levin has lost money. He's lost his pocketbook that had 37 pounds in it. So it's not just like, oh, there was like nothing in it or, you know, whatever. So they send the horseman back for it. And immediately I'm like, did the guest take it? This new guy, did he take it? I forgot his name. There's a V in it. That's all I remember. Veslovsky. He's new. We don't really know him. Well, I liked Levin briefly. All right. Chapter 9. Well, now what's our plan of campaign? Tell us all about it, said Stepan Arkadyevitch. Our plan is this. Now we're driving to Gvozdov. In Gvozdov, there's a grouse marsh on this side, and beyond Gvozdov come some magnificent snipe marshes where there are grouse too. It's hot now, and we'll get there. It's 15 miles or so, towards evening, and have some evening shooting. We'll spend the night there and go on tomorrow to the bigger moors. And is there nothing on the way? Yes, but we'll reserve ourselves. Besides, it's hot. There are 2 nice little places, but I doubt there being anything to shoot. Levin would himself have liked to go into these little places, but they were near home. He could shoot them over any time, and they were only little places. There would hardly be room for 3 to shoot. And so, with some insincerity, he said that he doubted there being anything to shoot. When they reached a little marsh, Levin would have driven by. But Stepan Arkadyevitch, with the experienced eye of a sportsman, at once detected reeds visible from the road. Shan't we try that? He said, pointing to the little marsh. Levin, do please, how delightful, Vasenka Veslovsky began begging, and Levin could but consent. Before they had time to stop, the dogs had flown one before the other into the marsh. Grak! Laska! The dogs came back. There won't be room for 3. I'll stay here, said Levin, hoping they would find nothing but peewits, who have been startled by the dogs, and turning over their flight, were plaintively wailing over the marsh. No, come along, Levin. Let's go together, Veslovsky called. Really, there's not room. Laska, back, Laska! You won't want another dog, will you? Levin remained with the wagonette and looked enviously at the sportsman. They walked right across the marsh, except little birds and peewits, of which Vasenka killed one. There was nothing in the marsh. Come, you see now that it was not that I grudged the marsh, said Levin. Only it's wasting time. Oh no, it was jolly all the same. Did you see us? Said Vasenka Veslovsky, clambering awkwardly into the wagonette with his gun and his peewit in his hand. How splendidly I shot this bird, didn't I? Well, shall we soon be getting to the real place? The horses started off suddenly. Levin knocked his head against the stock of someone's gun, and there was the report of a shot. The gun did actually go off first, but that was how it seemed to Levin. It appeared that Vasenka Veslovsky had pulled only one trigger and had left the other hammer still cocked. The charge flew into the ground without doing harm to anyone. Stepan Arkadyevitch shook his head and laughed reprovingly at Veslovsky. But Levin had not the heart to reprove him. In the first place, any reproach would have seemed to be called forth by the danger he had incurred and the bump that had come up on Levin's forehead. And besides, Veslovsky was at first so naively dressed, and then laughed so good-humoredly and infectiously at their general dismay, that one could not but laugh with him. When they reached the second marsh, which was fairly large and would inevitably take some time to shoot over, Levin tried to persuade them to pass it by. But Veslovsky again over-persuaded him. Again, as the marsh was narrow, Levin, like a good host, remained with the carriage. Krak made straight for some clumps of sedge. Vasenka Veslovsky was the first to run after the dog. Before Stepan Arkadyevitch had time to come up, a grouse flew out. Veslovsky missed it, and it flew into an unmown meadow. This grouse was left for Veslovsky to follow up. Krak found it again and pointed, and Veslovsky shot it and went back to the carriage. Now, you go, and I'll stay with the horses, he said. Levin had begun to feel the pangs of a sportsman's envy. He handed the reins to Veslovsky and walked into the marsh. Laska, who had been plaintively whining and fretting against the injustice of her treatment, flew straight ahead to a hopeful place that Levin knew well, and that Krak had not yet come upon. "Why don't you stop her?" shouted Stepan Arkadyevitch. "She won't scare them," answered Levin, sympathizing with his dog's pleasure and hurrying after her. As she came nearer and nearer the familiar breeding places, there was more and more earnestness in Laska's exploration. A little marsh bird did not divert her attention for more than an instant. She made one circuit round the clump of reeds, was beginning a second, and suddenly quivered with excitement and became motionless. "Come, Stiva," shouted Levin, feeling his heart beginning to beat more violently, and all of a sudden, as though some sort of shutter had been drawn back from his straining ears, all sounds, confused but loud, began to beat on his hearing, losing all sense of distance. He heard the steps of Stepan Arkadyevitch, mistaking them for the tramp of the horses in the distance. He heard the brittle sound of the twigs on which he had trodden, taking this sound for the flying of a grouse. He heard, too, not far behind him, a splashing in the water, which he could not explain to himself. Picking his steps, he moved up to the dog. "Fetch it." Not a grouse, but a snipe flew up from beside the dog. Levin had lifted his gun, but at the very instant when he was taking aim, the sound of splashing grew louder, came closer, and was joined with the sound of Veslovsky's voice, shouting something with strange loudness. Levin saw he had his gun pointed behind the snipe, but still he fired. When he had made sure he had missed, Levin looked round and saw the horses and the wagonette, not on the road, but in the marsh. Veslovsky, eager to see the shooting, had driven into the marsh and got the horses stuck in the mud. "Damn the fellow," Levin said to himself as he went back to the carriage that had sunk in the mire. "What did you drive in for?" he asked him dryly, and calling the coachman, he began pulling the horses out. Levin was vexed, both at being hindered from shooting and at his horses getting stuck in the mud, and still more at the fact that neither Stepan Arkadyevitch nor Veslovsky helped him and the coachman to unharness the horses and get them out, since neither of them had the slightest notion of harnessing. Without vouchsafing a syllable in reply to Vesenka's protestations that it had been quite dry there, Levin worked in silence with the coachman in extricating the horses. But then, as he got warm at the work and saw how assiduously Veslovsky was tugging at the wagonette by one of the mud guards so that he broke it indeed, Levin blamed himself for having, under the influence of yesterday's feelings, been too cold to Veslovsky, and tried to be particularly genial so as to smooth over his chilliness. When everything had been put right, and the carriage had been brought back to the road, Levin had the lunch served. "Bon appetit," Vasenka, who had recovered his spirits, quoted the French saying as he finished his second chicken. Now our troubles are over. Now everything's going to go well. Only to atone for my sins, I'm bound to sit on the box. That's so, eh? No. I'll be your automaton. You shall see how I'll get you along," he answered, not letting go of the rein, when Levin begged him to let the coachman drive. "No, I must atone for my sins, and I'm very comfortable on the box." And he drove. Levin was a little afraid he would exhaust the horses, especially the chestnut, whom he did not know how to hold in, but unconsciously he fell under the influence of his gaiety and listened to the songs he sang all the way on the box, or the descriptions and representations he gave of driving in the English fashion, four in hand. And it was in the very best of spirits that after lunch they drove to Gvlovstov Marsh. End of chapter 9. All right, so in this chapter, they are out on their hunting trip, these three boys and a coachman. And Levin is, he recognizes that he was being too harsh yesterday, and so he's trying to be nice today, but also, these things are happening, and so he's, being a little pouty, whatever the case is. However, I feel like, I don't know. I mean, it is just his mindset. If we look at the facts of the things that have happened, yeah, we can see them as being oh man, but also oh well, this is just what happens. The different places that they're going are very, very small, and it's not big enough for all three of them to go there and be able to catch good game. And so Levin is murmur about that. And so Stepan Arkadyevitch and Vasenka go out there, and they do, get birds, and they bring them back, and they're all right, it's your turn. And Levin goes out there, and he's great. And his dog goes out there. The dog's not going to scare anybody. He's fine with it. And so he is about to, he's hearing all these noises, and he's able to attribute it to what he thinks are different things. But what is actually happening is that the carriage and the horses have just been ridden into the water. And now they're stuck. And so Levin is children. And so neither Stepan or Vasenka are able to help because they don't know anything about horses. And so my gosh, I almost said Vronsky. And so Levin is unharnessing the horses, trying to get them out, and then push out the carriage so that they can do it again. And Vasenka is oh, I feel so bad, it's all my fault, let me drive. And as he's as we're pulling away at the end of the chapter, there's a note that Levin is he is going to exhaust these horses. So I just think that it's also showing very clearly the what is known as being like, this is how it is. This is obviously what everybody knows. For Levin is not the same for everybody. And so we're getting that like, oh, like city folk coming in and not knowing how to harness horses and not knowing, you know, that the ground is probably going to be a little gross, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it's gross, and things like that. So I think it's interesting. Chapter 10. Vasenka drove the horses so smartly that they reached the marsh too early, while it was still hot. As they drew near this more important marsh, the chief aim of their expedition, Levin could not help considering how he could get rid of Vasenka and be free in his movements. Stepan Arkadyevich evidently had the same desire, and on his face Levin saw the look of anxiety always present in a true sportsman when beginning shooting, together with a certain good-humored slyness peculiar to him. "How shall we go? It's a splendid marsh, I see, and there are hawks," said Stepan Arkadyevich, pointing to two great birds hovering over the reeds. "Where there are hawks, there is sure to be game." "Now, gentlemen," said Levin, pulling up his boots and examining the lock of his gun with rather a gloomy expression. "Do you see those reeds?" He pointed to an oasis of blackish green in the huge, half-mown, wet meadow that stretched along the right bank of the river. "The marsh begins here, straight in front of us. Do you see? Where it is greener? From here it runs to the right, where the horses are. There are breeding places there, and grouse, and all round those reeds are as far as that alder, that right up to the mill. Over there, do you see, where the pools are? That's the best place. There I once shot 17 snipe. We'll separate with the dogs and go in different directions, and then meet over there at the mill." "Well, which shall go to the left and which to the right?" asked Stepan Arkadyevich. "It's wider to the right. You two go that way, and I'll take the left," he said with apparent carelessness. "Captain, capital. We'll make the bigger bag. Yes, come along, Vasenka exclaimed. Levin could do nothing but agree, and they divided. As soon as they entered the marsh, the two dogs began hunting about together and made towards the green, slime-covered pool. Levin knew Laska's method, wary and indefinite. He knew the place, too, and expected a whole covey of snipe. "Veslovsky, beside me, walk beside me," he said in a faint voice to his companion, splashing in the water behind him. Levin could not help feeling an interest in the direction his gun was pointed, after that casual shot near the Kolpensky marsh. "Oh, I won't get in your way. Don't trouble about me." But Levin could not help troubling, and recalled Kitty's words at parting. "Mind, you don't shoot one another." The dogs came nearer and nearer, past each other, each pursuing its own scent. The expectation of snipe was so intense that to Levin, the squelching sound of his own heel as he drew it up out of the mire seemed to be the call of a snipe, and he clutched and pressed the lock of his gun. Bang, bang, sounded almost in his ear. Vasenka had fired at a flock of ducks, which was hovering over the marsh and flying at that moment towards the sportsman, far out of range. Before Levin had time to look round, there was, with the whirl of one snipe, another, a third, and some 8 more rose one after another. Stepan Arkadyevich hit one at the very moment when it was beginning its zigzag movements, and the snipe fell in a heap into the mud. Oblonsky aimed deliberately at another, still flying low in the reeds, and together with the report of the shot, that snipe, too, fell, and it could be seen fluttering out where the sedge had been cut, its unhurt wing showing white beneath. Levin was not so lucky. He aimed at his first bird too low and missed. He aimed at it again, just as it was rising, but at that instant another snipe flew up at his very feet, distracting him, so that he missed again. While they were loading their guns, another snipe rose, and Veslovsky, who had had time to load again, sent 2 charges of small shot into the water. Stepan Arkadyevitch picked up his snipe and, with sparkling eyes, looked at Levin. "Well, now let us separate," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, and limping on his left foot, holding his gun in readiness and whistling to his dog, he walked off in one direction. Levin and Veslovsky walked in the other. It always happened with Levin that when his first shots were a failure, he got hot and out of temper, and shot badly the whole day. So it was that day. The snipe showed themselves in numbers. They kept flying up from just under the dogs, from under the sportsman's legs, and Levin might have retrieved his ill luck. But the more he shot, the more he felt disgraced in the eyes of Veslovsky, who kept popping away merrily and indiscriminately, killing nothing and not in the slightest abashed by his ill success. Levin, in feverish haste, could not restrain himself, got more and more out of temper, and ended by shooting almost without a hope of hitting. Laska, indeed, seemed to understand this. She began looking more languidly, and gazed back at the sportsman, as it were, with perplexity or reproach in her eyes. Shots followed shots in rapid succession. The smoke of the powder hung about the sportsman, while in the great roomy net of the game bag there were only 3 light little snipe, and of these 1 had been killed by Veslovsky alone, and 1 by both of them together. Meanwhile, from the other side of the marsh came the sound of Stepan Arkadyevitch's shots, not frequent, but, as Levin fancied, well directed, for almost after each they heard crack, crack, apporter. This excited Levin still more. The snipe were floating continually in the air over the reeds, their whirring wings close to the earth, and their harsh cries high in the air could be heard on all sides. The snipe that had risen first and flown up into the air settled again before the sportsman. Instead of 2 hawks, there were now dozens of them hovering with shrill cries over the marsh. After walking through the larger half of the marsh, Levin and Veslovsky reached the place where the peasants' mowing grass was divided into long strips reaching to the reeds, marked off in one place by the trampled grass, in another by a path mown through it. Half of these strips had already been mown, though there was not so much hope of finding birds in the uncut part as the cut part. Levin had promised Stepan Arkadyevitch to meet him, and so he walked on with his companion through the cut and uncut patches. "Hi, sportsman," shouted one of the groups of peasants sitting on an unharnessed cart. "Come and have some lunch with us. Have a drop of wine." Levin looked round. "Come along, it's all right," shouted a good-humored-looking bearded peasant with a red face, showing his teeth in a grin and holding up a greenish bottle that flashed in the sunlight. "Qu'est-ce que c'est de sen?" said Veslovsky. "They invite you to have some vodka. Most likely they've been dividing the meadow into lots. I should have some," said Levin, not without some guile, hoping Veslovsky would be tempted by the vodka and would go away to them. "Why do they offer it?" "Oh, they're merrymaking. Really, you should join them. You would be interested. Allons, c'est... Curo? You go. You'll find the way to the mill," cried Levin, and looking round he perceived with satisfaction that Veslovsky, bent and stumbling with weariness, holding his gun out at arm's length, was making his way out of the marsh towards the peasants. "You too, come," the peasants shouted to Levin. "Never fear. You taste our cake." Levin felt a strong inclination to drink a little vodka and to eat some bread. He was exhausted and felt it a great effort to drag his staggering legs out of the mire, and for a minute he hesitated. But Laska was setting, and immediately all his weariness vanished, and he walked lightly through the swamp towards the dog. A snipe flew up at his feet. He fired and killed it. Laska still pointed. "Fetch it!" Another bird flew up close to the dog. Levin fired. But it was an unlucky day for him. He missed it. And when he went to look for the one he had shot, he could not find that either. He wandered all about the reeds, but Laska did not believe he had shot it, and when he sent her to find it, she pretended to hunt for it, but did not really. And in the absence of Vasenka, on whom Levin threw the blame of his failure, things went no better. There were plenty of snipe still, but Levin made one miss after another. The slanting rays of the sun were still hot. His clothes, soaked through with perspiration, stuck to his body. His left boot, full of water, weighed heavily on his legs and squeaked at every step. The sweat ran in drops down his powder-grimed face. His mouth was full of the bitter taste, his nose of the smell of powder and stagnant water. His ears were ringing with the incessant whir of the snipe. He could not touch the stock of his gun. It was so hot. His heart beat with short, rapid throbs. His hands shook with excitement, and his weary legs stumbled and staggered over the hillocks and in the swamp. But still he walked on, and still he shot. At last, after a disgraceful miss, he flung his gun and his hat on the ground. "No, I must control myself," he said to himself. Picking up his gun and his hat, he called Laska and went out of the swamp. When he got on to dry ground, he sat down, pulled off his boot, and emptied it. Then walked to the marsh, drank some stagnant-tasting water, moistened his burning hot gun, and washed his hands and face. Feeling refreshed, he went back to the spot where a snipe had settled, firmly resolved to keep cool. He tried to be calm, but it was the same again. His finger pressed, and before he had taken good aim at a bird, it got worse and worse. He had only 5 birds in his game bag when he walked out of the marsh towards the alders, where he was to rejoin Stepan Arkadyevitch. Before he caught sight of Stepan Arkadyevitch, he saw his dog. Crack darted out from behind the twisted root of an alder, black all over with the stinking mire of the marsh, and with the air of a conqueror sniffed at Laska. Behind Crack there came into view in the shade of the alder tree the shapely figure of Stepan Arkadyevitch. He came to meet him, red and perspiring, with unbuttoned neckband, still limping in the same way. "Well, you have been popping away," he said, smiling good-humoredly. "How have you gone on?" queried Levin, but there was no need to ask, for he had already seen the full game bag. Pretty fair. He had 14 birds. "A splendid marsh. I've no doubt Veslovsky got in your way. It's awkward, too, shooting with one dog," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, to soften his triumph. End of chapter 10. All right. Chapter 10. We're still with our 3 boys. And Vasenka is getting in the way and also getting on Levin's nerves. And so they divide, but there's 2 paths, and so the way that they divide is Stepan Arkadyevitch goes by himself with his dogs, and Vasenka and Levin, of course, go the other way because the path is wider and can fit more people. And so as they're going along, like, Vasenka is just shooting for the sake of shooting, and he doesn't really care. It seems his mannerisms is that it's not like a big deal that he's not getting any game or getting any hits, and Levin is having a terrible day. And when he knows that when he starts off bad luck, it just makes him mad. And then he just continues to have bad luck because he's thinking about how he hasn't caught anything. And so that is what is happening with him. And Levin and Vasenka come across these people who are enjoying themselves. They're having wine, they're having bread, they're just taking a little rest. And they call over and they're like, come join us. And so Levin is like, oh, Vasenka, go on, bud. Go hang out with them. You know where to meet me. Go, have fun. They have vodka. And so then Levin goes off by himself and he's like, all right, now I can do this. Now I can get all of the snipe because I'm amazing. And he still has no luck. So, whoop. And then he comes across Stepan Arkadyevich where they are supposed to meet. And Levin has only caught like 5 birds. And Stepan Arkadyevich has a full game bag. It is completely full. And he's like, oh yeah, it was great. And then notices that Levin did not have such a great trip. And so they're like, all right, well, it's because like you had Vasenka who definitely got in your way, and like you only had 1 dog and I had 2, so I get it. Like that's the only reason, gun barrel envy. Yeah. And that's where we ended. So that's where we're gonna end today. This, this is a little slow. I'm sure that Tolstoy, if you're just reading this for like action bits and like drama and intrigue, I'm sure that Tolstoy is building. I'm sure that something is going to happen. I half expected Vasenka to like accidentally shoot Levin, and I was just like patiently waiting for that moment. But if you're waiting for that, it's just like, all right, come on, let's do this. But if you're reading it for like, I don't know, like literary purposes, I'm sure you could read a lot into it, which I probably would if I wasn't like doing it in front of like everybody and doing it live. If I was like sitting with my thoughts, like, yes, the birds, they represent this, and this person represents this or whatever. So it's interesting. It is interesting. But yeah, I'm still enjoying this, even though this part seems to be a bit of a sludge, a bit slow. But we know it's going to pick up. We know this. I'm saying we know this so that I manifest it. But yes, it was a pleasure as always. Whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.